and my friend, MSNBC contributor Steve Schmidt, a former Republican strategist, now co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Steve, because it just happened, let me ask you about this staggering number of Republicans who voted against even holding a trial in the Senate for Donald Trump.
It's not surprising. Look, right now, when you look around the country, Nicolle, there are at least 4 or 5 Republican state parties that are now Q parties. They've been taken over fully by the QAnon people. Matt Gaetz has made clear that Donald Trump is the forever leader of the Republican Party and the America First movement. And that America First movement, his, just like the one that preceded it, 85, we have to be clear-eyed about that in this moment in time. And so that vote isn't surprising. Donald Trump is in Mar-a-Lago. He is regrouping. He's made his first endorsements. He's opened up his former office. We'll see what their next move is. But these Republican senators will not be able to look away from what happened. And what happened was incited to violence by the President of the United States, Donald Trump, a horde that consisted of white supremacists, white nationalists, fascist Proud Boys, extremist militias, violent and murderous thugs stormed the Capitol of the United States. They bludgeoned to death a policeman. 6 people were killed. During that violent attack on the Capitol of the United States, the American flag was ripped down. The MAGA flag was raised in its place, raised over the American flag. The floors of the Senate and the House of Representatives were desecrated. A constitutionally mandated function was interrupted on purpose on the basis of a big lie that those members like Hawley, like Cruz, not only were complicit in, were the fathers of. And so that incited mob came, and it came for the purposes of denying the franchise in part to millions of black voters who had decided to change course from the Trump presidency. And after that attack, 7 senators, 140 House members voted, in essence, to throw out millions of black votes to install the loser of the election as the winner, to make the loser the dictator, and end the American Republic. That was the consequence of that vote if it had succeeded. So no, this was weeks ago, not years ago. There is no moving on from this. This is why corporate America, big company after big company, Google today, has said no more donations to you, the Sedition Caucus. And so what we see is a desire for fantasy, a desire for delusion, to turn away from the desecration of the Capitol incited by the president, the second branch of government attacking the first. There will be accountability in this country. There will be justice in this country, and it won't just be for the incited. It will be for the inciters as well as this plays out. A disappointing vote, but not surprising, but one much less grounded in reality than a fantasy that they believe wrongly that they can push away.
You know, Steve, just listening to Dr. Patel talk and Matt Weiser report on the Biden administration focus, I'm thinking about transitions. And usually when we talk about how dangerous a transition is for the country, we're thinking about national security, threats from foreign adversaries. But it's clear, listening to Dr. Patel and listening to Matt and reading all the reporting, that with the Trump, if there were a White House parakeet, you wouldn't trust that the parakeet were in good health from the Trump White House to the Biden White House. He was handing off the most elaborate, high-stakes, detailed, multi-leveled, operational endeavor, probably in modern history. And the notion that it's a mess seems obvious in hindsight, but slightly terrifying. Just talk about the task of coming in at this level in the midst of crisis and what you imagine Ron Klain and this White House staff is contending with.
Well, they haven't walked into a mess. They've walked into a catastrophe. We're in the middle of one of the great catastrophes in American history. And so this is the 6th day of the Biden presidency. And there is no president with the possible exception of Lincoln at the edge of civil war, who has been dealt a tougher hand than this president because, like Lincoln, and this stood until Trump became the president, Lincoln followed the worst president in American history, not named Trump. And so following the worst president means everywhere you look, there's disaster. Let's just look at one example. You talked about Jared Kushner. This is important to understand because we throw around words like evil loosely. But there was a meeting in the White House. We worked in the White House, and we're familiar with those rooms in the West Wing of the White House. And there was PowerPoint, and there were computers. There was coffee and bagels, I'm sure. And they made a deliberate and premeditated decision in the meeting led by Jared Kushner, the president's incompetent son-in-law, who had no business being in the White House, no business of being in charge of anything in the White House. But he made a decision. There would be no national response because the virus, in his estimation, was going to do the damage in the blue states. And that would hurt the president's enemies. And that zero-sum thinking, that would therefore be good for Trump. And because of that decision, and let's think about it, was that an evil decision? That was an evil decision. If it's not an evil decision, what else could you possibly call it? It was not just an incompetent decision. It was purposeful and premeditated. It is the amorality. It is the incompetence. It is the staggering malice that in the middle of this catastrophe, Donald Trump did everything he possibly could out of spite, out of his own failing campaign and bruised ego. He did everything he could to make it harder for this president to fix the catastrophe that Trump had wrought. And as a result, more Americans will die than otherwise would have died. And it will take more time than it otherwise would have taken. But we have very, very competent and able people back at the helm of government who know exactly what they're doing. The president has communicated clearly and honestly. He's talked about the difficulties. He's talked about the stakes and the challenges that we have to unify as a country to face.
It's not a mess. It's a catastrophe will be the name of whatever T-shirt or ice cream flavor I'm asked to design ever in my life. Steve Schmidt.